Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Ryan Little. I'm an AWS Technical Program Manager for the AWS Educate team here in EMEA. And we're going to walk through today how to launch an Amazon EC2 Linux instance via the AWS Educate portal. And you'll see here that I am in the homepage of AWS Educate, and that is where we will start. There is also a study guide or step-by-step guide that I'll make available to all of you that outlines all the steps that we will follow for this lab. And so you'll see here it has step-by-step guides and documentation as well as screenshots, hopefully to make it a little bit easier for you. And this lab actually comes from the AWS Immersion Day, which are one-day events usually that we give for many of our customers. And so I'll walk you through those steps. The very first thing that you're going to want to do is sign into the AWS Educate portal. If you haven't yet created an account, make sure you go ahead and do that as an educator, or if you're representing your institution, you can do that with this Join AWS Educate button. If you've already done so, then we're just going to sign in and input our credentials. And we'll be taken to effectively the home page for AWS Educate for educators. You'll please make note of the number of tabs at the top right here. These tabs are really important for your continued learning on top of AWS. So here you can find a rich ecosystem of content. You can create classrooms, which I would recommend for all of you as educators. If and when you create classrooms, your students are consuming the classroom credits, not their starter account credits. That becomes really important, and also for you, it's a great way to manage student environments on top of AWS Educate. And there's other recordings, other sessions that go into more detail on that. So make sure you're definitely leveraging that for the future. For your own continued development, there's professional development tab here with continued learnings if you want to get certified on AWS. If you want to explore something called pathways, which our students have access to, you can find that there as well. For our purposes today, for launching an EC2 instance, we're going to launch it from our AWS starter account as educators. And we're going to go ahead and verify that we have a starter account and access that environment. We use a third-party provider called Vocarium, so it's redirected me to the Vocarium site. I have some FAQs in regards to my AWS Educate account. Very important to note for when we talk later about where your resources live in the cloud. There's really only one region that you can use for starter and classroom accounts, which is US East 1, otherwise known as Northern Virginia. That's one of our 22 regions around the world. So, and you're automatically taken to that region, but we want to make sure that we stay there for any activity that we're doing with AWS Educate. For my educator starter account, I can see the number of credits I have, the dollar amount of credits I have left, and session time. And when I'm ready, I'm going to go ahead and click on AWS Console, which will redirect me to the Management Console for our AWS environment. And you'll see here I'm effectively in the Management Console now. This is our home page for AWS. I see that I am in Northern Virginia, US East 1. We do have other regions, but for Educate, and because you're an Educate member, make sure that you stay in this region when you're building, no matter for yourself in the starter account or for classrooms. And then you'll see there's a couple of ways to access services. I can do it through the search bar here. So if we're looking to build an EC2, which we will later, I can do that, click on EC2, or I can find it in the recently visited services if I was there relatively recently, or I can get a full drop-down menu of all the services in this given region. So currently at AWS, we have over 175 plus services in our cloud environment. As an AWS Educate member, you get access to most of those services. There is a complete list that's available to you as well via the Educate portal, so make sure you look to that as well. So when you're ready, we're going to click on EC2. And we're taken to the EC2 dashboard page. And you'll see here some characteristics of our computing environment as far as number of running instances, if I have number of volumes or security groups I've created, or key pairs. Key pairs are very important. It's actually where we're going to start for AWS and for actually the first step before creating an EC2 instance. And what a key pair is effectively helps you authenticate into your instance environment. Upon creation of the key pair, you will be given a download of the private key pair that matches to the public key pair, which AWS stores. And it's the combination of those two, the private and the public key pair, that effectively helps you authenticate into that instance environment. And we're going to be creating our key pair for this instance. I've pre-allocated or pre-created this one with a random first and last name, and I used the documentation in the study guide for immersion day, but you don't have to have that. But just to be consistent with that environment, I've used that. And so what we're going to do is click on Create Key Pair here in the top right, a big orange button, and indicate the name of that key pair. Usually first and last, or some other naming convention that you can easily remember. And then we choose our file format. So if you're using OpenSSH, it'll most likely be a .pem file format, or if you're using PuTTY, it'll be .ppk. And then as and when you're ready, you click on Create Key Pair. And then from there, once you hit Create, it should automatically download for you. And make sure you save that in a safe place. Now, I've already created this key pair, so I'm not actually going to go through that step. But you'll see here that it is populated. And once you do that, you'll see that populate here. And we'll come back to this a little bit later. And so the next thing we're going to do is, actually, I'm going to show you the page that we're going to render in EC2, which effectively is this. It's just a short little page that has some metadata about the instance that we will launch. You'll see the AWS logo up here. We have a load test and an RDS button. We're not going to play with those, but those also are populated in our script, which we'll have a little bit later. And the metadata. So every instance is given a unique instance ID. And that's what this is here effectively. And so this is just an example of what that will look like upon instance launch. So that's going to be populated on this page, as well as where that particular instance lives and what we call availability zone, or cluster of data centers in Northern Virginia that it is housed in. And then we have our CPU load percentage. So that's what we're looking for. If we do everything right, hopefully we'll get to that page. So we're going to go up to EC2 dashboard. Click on that. We're going to go down to this orange button here for launch instance, and then just kind of hover over. You'll see that name again, and just make sure you click on that. Now, it's very important to know that if we're going to be launching 1 or 10 or 100 or even 1,000 instances, no matter how many you launch, all of our instances stem from or come from what's called an AMI, or Amazon Machine Image. And you can think of an AMI as a template or a framework of your compute environment. And within that template, you're going to have your choice of operating system, so whether it's Windows or Linux or some other variety or flavor. And that's going to be the foundation upon which we build our computing environment or our applications. So very important to choose the right type. And you see we have a number of different operating systems here that you can choose from. We're going to stick to the Amazon Linux 2 AMI or AMI. And when you're ready, hit the blue select button. And then from here, once we know the template upon which our application will live, here's where we can start to kind of configure our instance environment. So here, when we talk about configuring, we're really talking about any combination of CPU, memory, or networking capacity that we need to launch our application. We have a number of different families that are available to you: general purpose, compute optimized, storage optimized. For most folks starting out on AWS, the recommendation is to start with the general purpose, unless you know what specified type of application you're going to run, just to get your level sets right and get your specs right. And the general purpose here really just means equal levels of CPU, memory, and storage, and network capacity. You'll see that it's auto assigned to the general purpose T2 micro, which is one of our smaller instance types. And we're going to stay with that default and click on configure instance details. From here, we're going to, well, one could configure your effectively your networking environment. So where is this instance going to live? Often referred to as your VPC or virtual private cloud. It's your network topology. You can identify what subnet or subnetwork of that networking environment it'll live in, and other configurations. For our purposes today, we're going to leave all of these as default. We're going to scroll down to advanced details. It might be hidden from you. If it is, just click on that arrow and scroll down. You'll see this box appear. And here we will input our script. So user data is a script that launches at the launch of the instance. And I do have a short script that I will launch here, and I'll make sure that this script is available for you. And I'm just going to plug this in. And effectively what this script will do is create this environment, right? Upon a launch of instance, it's going to grab all of this information for us, that metadata information. So I plug that script in, bootstrapping it, if you will, and click on next. Here I can add storage to our instance environment, so I can stripe one or multiple volumes here as and when needed. I can maybe even choose whether I want to encrypt those volumes or not. Different volume types and sizes that I have available as well. But for our purposes, we're going to leave that as default. You can add a tag, and a tag is an easy way to find a resource within AWS. It's really good for compliance teams that want to track, or maybe as an educator, you want to track a particular student's EC2 instance environment and see if they've configured it the way that you wanted them to. So I'm going to use a key of name and a value of EC2, call that EC2 demo. And then next go to our security groups. Now a security group is effectively a firewall for our instance. Okay, and so as everything's closed by default with AWS, and unless I have the express permissions to open that environment, or open a particular port, which we do as educators here, then otherwise that port will be closed. So it is closed by default. And we do, well, actually, one of the first things that we're going to do is create a new security group. And I'm going to use the name, the same name I have for my key pair. And I'll plug in that security group name as well as the description. For SSH or authenticating, it is a TCP protocol for port 22. Under source, which is effectively allowing that port to be opened, it can be any number of variety of sources. It can be customized through a custom IP address. It can be anywhere in the world, which is all the zeros that you see here, or it could be through a specific IP address. For our purposes, we're going to choose anywhere. Normally, this would be locked down to a specific IP, SSH. This is a demo, but so we're just going to leave it like that for now. But best practice is to follow security group documentation for that. We're also going to open up another port, HTTP, port 80, again, opening that to the world. And just to be sure that I know, in fact, that it is open, it gives me this nice warning that says, by the way, anybody effectively could try to authenticate or attempt to authenticate, and anybody can access this page that we want to have. And I do want people to access the page here, so I do want that particular port open. But normally, as I said, we'd lock down this SSH protocol or rule. But once we're ready, we go to review. We have a nice warning sign up here as well saying it's open to the world. And as and when we're ready to launch, it gives you a brief description of a key pair, which I've talked about earlier. And here is where we acknowledge that we've created a key pair. So it says choose existing, which we've done. If for whatever reason we haven't done that step, I can go to create a new one, and I can follow the steps to do that. So I'm acknowledging that this key pair exists, and I'm good to go. Very important, once you click launch instance, that's when typically if you have an AWS account, not an Educate account, but an AWS account, that's where costs start to incur. And so just be mindful of that from a cost perspective. Our $50 credit will also be being leveraged here for leveraging the cost of this instance. Okay, so that instance is now launching. I can view that instance. You'll see here I have a number of attempts that I've created for EC2 demo. If I click on this kind of spinning blue circle, I can get information about the instance itself. I can learn, and I've been pre-allocated an instance ID, which we'll verify later. I've been given a public DNS as well as a public IP. I can see that this particular instance, I can see where it lives in Northern Virginia, US East 1D. It's actually in a running state now. It's still initializing, but sometimes what I like to do is just grab the DNS here and just see if I can render that page even while it's initializing. Not quite yet, so maybe we'll come back to that a little bit later. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pause the video and I'm going to try to pull up my terminal and authenticate via the terminal. Okay, so I'm just going to jump back into my EC2 console. I'm going to pull, normally what I would do is, you'll see the instance is still initializing. I'm going to pull this IP address, typically is what I do is I copy that to a clipboard. I've opened up my terminal, I've input the path to where my key pair, private key pair lives, or private key file lives, and I've also put in the SSH command to access this instance, and I would paste that IP address, public IP address here. If all of that goes well, it's going to ask me to connect, or am I sure, and it's going to verify my key pair, and I've correctly authenticated. So now I'm inside that particular instance, and then now that I'm here, I could do a sudo yum install if I wanted. I could do an AWS configure or an AWS help. This has the command AWS CLI already pre-installed. I have a number of commands if I scroll down that I can see, and actually a number of services that I can access via the CLI. So we know that this works, that I've successfully authenticated. Let me jump back into my instance environment. I'm going to do a quick refresh here. Now I see that it's running, it's green, it's in a 2.2 state. I'm going to go back to my instance, to my web page and reload. And I do see the page has been rendered, which has been good. It's a success. To verify that it has, I usually look at the last three alphanumeric configurations for my instance ID, which is 7EC. I can go into my EC2 console and verify, in fact, that that is the instance that I've launched and also the one that I've authenticated into here as well. So really, really helpful this lab, I hope, and you've got some experience in launching an EC2 instance. Stay tuned for other labs. We're going to try to look at relational database service and Internet of Things and AI and ML labs in the future. So stay connected with us. If you are interested, there is an Amazon EC2 public page. If you go to aws.amazon.com under products and compute, you'll find this page. And there's also a great getting started tab that you can explore as well. And finally, the step-by-step guide I'll make sure is available to all of you as well, which effectively walks through all the steps that we've done thus far. So hopefully you found this particular environment and lab helpful. The last step here is to follow best practice. If you're not going to be using a resource, the recommendation is to turn it off. And so what you'll want to do is select the instance and go up to Actions, Instance State, and I can either stop that instance, which means the resource is still living in the cloud, but in a stop state, so I'm no longer paying for compute. There may be maybe incremental storage cost if I added some data in that instance, or if I know I'm not going to use that instance ever again, the recommendation is just to terminate it, right? And so I know I'm not going to use this anytime soon, and I want to limit the credits, cost of credits that I have in my Educate environment. So I'm going to verify and terminate that instance. It'll move into a shutting down state, and then I'm waiting for where it says terminated. Or once it's in a terminated state, I'll no longer be paying for it. So try to follow the best practices here, using it when you using a resource when you need to, and then turning it off or stopping it or hibernating it to no longer incur charges to that resource. That's a best practice here, really, for any of the services that you leverage on AWS. Okay, so with that, I'm going to pause the video, and you'll see there it's moved into a terminated state. And actually stop the video and see you again in a future AWS session.